Great. Okay. Well, I'll say good morning, good afternoon, sorry, and welcome to everyone for joining our first landlord webinar of 2022 today. We have presented webinars every other month throughout last year, which have proved to be quite successful. We've had some good feedback. So welcome to those who have been seen our webinars before, and also to those who have registered for the first time. I hope you find the content useful. Just to introduce myself for those that don't know me, my name's Clarke. I'm the Lettings and Property Management Director of Nock Deighton, with over 30 years experience in the Shropshire and Worcestershire lettings market. Today, I'm joined by two experts in their specialist fields. First of all, Paul Compson of Compsons Heating and Plumbing. Hi, Paul. Family business trading for 62 years and specialising in heat pump installations, central heating and plumbing. Paul is going to talk to us about heat pumps in rental properties today. And my second guest speaker is Graham Loosley, who kindly spoke at our webinar in September last year, and we received some great feedback. And so I've invited him to speak again, and his subject today is family investment companies. All those attending the live presentation today will have the opportunity to ask the speakers questions by entering those in the chat box, which should be visible at the bottom of your screens. I will read those questions out to each speaker at the end of their individual presentations, and we can carry these on at the end. Before I pass you over to our first speaker, I'd just like to give you an update on the proposed legislation changes that we're expecting this year. First of all, on right to rent checks, this legislation was first introduced in 2016, whereby landlords and agents are required to check the residency status of all tenants that are moving into properties and make sure that they have a right to rent in the UK. The legislation changed temporarily in 2020 due to COVID. And became digital, but that is due to end on the 5th of April. However, we are expecting a new digital process to be introduced, which will be better than the old paper system. Secondly, smoke and carbon monoxide alarm checks. Landlords will be legally required to ensure a carbon monoxide alarm is installed in any room in their rental properties with a fixed combustion appliance. At the moment, that just relates to open fires and any solid fuel appliances, but that will soon be extended, which makes common sense, to all fixed combustion appliances except gas cookers. Landlords will also be legally obliged to repair or replace alarms when they're faulty. So that's due sometime this year, but it is obviously good practice to just make sure you've got the carbon monoxide alarms fitted in those rooms really with immediate effect, which what we're doing with all of our rental properties. Next one is the Renters Reform Bill. No date confirmed yet, but this is what the Queen announced about 3 years ago. The white paper is expected to be published this spring and is likely to mention the abolition of section 21 notice, which is the notice requiring possession, a significant reform of the section 8 grounds, provision for a specialist housing court, and the introduction of lifetime deposits for tenants. So that again is expected sometime this year, so more information on that as soon as we have it. And finally, minimum energy efficiency standards, which I have mentioned before. As you may know, there is a new minimum EPC rating of C or above for all new tenancies, which is likely to be introduced from 2026. This is being put back a year as it was initially stated to be 2025. This is in line with government plans to hit net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This will actually affect, it's stated, 3.2 million landlords. So there's a lot to do for landlords and properties in the UK. The cost cap of what landlords must spend before they can apply for an exemption on the minimum energy efficiency standards is expected to rise from 3,500, which it is at the moment, to 10,000. So that means that a landlord must spend up to 10,000, well, sorry, a minimum of £10,000 before they can apply for an exemption. So that's a big change there. Again, no dates yet, but we are expecting a formal announcement this year. So that puts me on a good segue for me to hand you over to Paul Compson, who is going to talk about heat pumps in rental properties. So I will hand you over to Paul.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for having me along. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Just bear with me. Hopefully you can all see that. Is that all right, Dawn? Yeah, great. So yeah. As Dawn mentioned, my name's Paul Compson. Thrilled to be here and able to talk to you about heat pumps and what they can do for both landlords and tenants alike. Just to give you a bit of background on me, I've been involved in the industry pretty much since birth, but officially I would say 20 years. I served the first few years of my family business, then went off to Brighton and spent 7 years with a company called PH Jones. Towards the back, they do servicing and maintenance contracts and installations for registered social landlords up and down the country. I worked my way through that business and ended up looking after the south and was in charge of around 160,000 properties by the time I left, at which point we got bought out by British Gas. I served 2 years with British Gas, working with their leadership teams and delivering leadership packages across Centrica and BG. And then decided to come back to the Midlands for whatever reason and rejoin my family business, which has been established since 1959. I'm third generation, and so each generation of the business has brought in the new heating technology. So it was solid fuel boilers with my grandfather, it was combination boilers with my dad, and it's now air source and ground source heat pumps with me. We're specialists in all type of domestic heating systems, oil-fired, LPG, natural gas, underfloor heating, you name it. And we actually installed our first heat pump back in 2004 to a farm in a village called Claverley. So what is a heat pump? I'm not going to bore you too much with the specifics of technology in heat pumps, but basically the long and short of it is there are three main types of heat pump that are available on the market. Both for domestic and commercial use. Air source heat pump, which generates its heat from the air, won't come as any surprise. Ground source heat pump, it generates its heat using stored solar energy in the ground. And you can think of this a bit more like underfloor heating, but in reverse. And then you've got water source, which is incredibly rare because, as you'll see from the picture there, you need a decent volume of water nearby in order to utilize the technology. And how it works, essentially what happens is that the heat pumps, regardless of whether it's ground or air or water, they utilize the properties of refrigerant gas, because refrigerant gas can turn from a liquid to a gas state at incredibly low temperatures. And essentially then what happens is that gas, refrigerant gas, is compressed, which generates heat and therefore goes into your central heating system. I've heard many times people describe this as a fridge in reverse, and actually they're not. They use a lot of similar components to a fridge, but where I'd like you to think of it is if you've ever blown up a ball using a small needle, what's happening there is you're taking a large volume of gas and compressing it through a very tiny needle. And if any of you have ever done this, if you touch the needle at the end, it's red hot and will actually burn you. That's the principle of an air source heat pump. It's taking refrigerant gas, a large volume of refrigerant gas, compressing it through a tiny space, and then via a heat exchanger, transferring that heat into your radiator water, underfloor heating water, basically central heating water. So why would you choose a heat pump? Well, to start off with, there are government incentives. Last year, we successfully rolled out the Green Homes Grants incentive. That's now finished. And continuing alongside the Green Homes Grants was an incentive that still exists today. It's called the Renewable Heat Incentive. That runs to new applicants, particularly for landlords up to and including midnight on 31st of March 2022. And following the Renewable Heat Incentive will be the Clean Homes Grant, or Boiler Upgrade Scheme is sometimes known as, and that's available to new applicants from the 1st of April 2022. There are differences between the two schemes, and I'll come on to those in a second. The other interesting point for landlords in particular are the low annual maintenance costs for heat pumps. For the first few years, and dependent on the warranty of the heat pump that you go with, it's suggested that you have them serviced every year. But servicing on heat pumps is incredibly straightforward. It's something actually you can do yourself if you wanted to, albeit to maintain your warranties, you will have to have a professional to do it for the initial warranty period. And thereafter, I'm proposing to run something similar to a solar system where you'd typically have it serviced every 2 or 3 years. So there's a significant saving against a landlord's gas safety certificate, for example, or an oil service, which can be quite expensive. For your tenants, there is significant savings on the energy required to run heat pumps. Typically, when compared to oil and LPG systems, and I'll show you a real example of this just shortly, they are much less expensive. And actually, when we consider the current economic climate, and particularly with mains gas prices rising steadily, actually heat pumps are now very much in favour compared to running costs against mains gas. And typically, air source heat pumps offer the best carbon saving measure for your properties. 40% of a property's energy goes into the heating system, and air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps offer the most significant carbon saving for you. And also considering the longevity of the system, this is kind of where it's useful to compare air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps to fridges, because they use a lot of similar components to a fridge. And so I often ask myself the question, when was the last time I had my fridge serviced? And I haven't. And when was the last time my fridge broke? I've never had a fridge that's broke. I've always chosen to change the fridge myself. So I'm probably making that a bit too simplistic. There are a lot of technological and printed circuit boards and clever electronics in heat pumps. But when we seriously got into the market in the last 7 years, I've not had one go down yet. No repairs, no in-warranty repairs at all. And they seem to be very robust. So what's the renewable heat incentive? The renewable heat incentive is best for long-term investments of a property. The downside is you need to act quickly in order for this to be applicable to you and your properties. And you certainly need to get an install achieved certainly by the end of March so that you can make that application. Critical to all of the schemes are EPCs. You need to have an EPC for the particular property within 2 years. And that EPC needs to show that you've done the bare minimum in terms of insulating that property. Fundamental for heat pumps anyway, because they run at lower temperatures than a traditional boiler would. But you need to show that you've done the cavity wall insulation, you've done the loft insulation, and you've had double glazing. The vast majority of our customers have done this. If on the EPC it recommends or it tells you that you need to apply cavity wall insulation or loft insulation, then you can expect that the application for RHI would not be granted. And the downside to that is the application is post-installation or post-air source heat pump or ground source heat pump installation. What I do what we do as a business is we hold your hand through that process to ensure you've got the best possible opportunity to obtain RHI. And of all the customers that we serviced last year, and indeed since we started installing heat pumps, I've not had a customer yet that has failed to achieve RHI, but we do need to make sure we tick all the boxes to ensure that that you're going to get that. When I say it's better for long-term investment, the top right-hand box of the screen shows you, this is a real-life example of a customer called Jane who's doing a rental property, starting with us today, actually, over in Brierley Hill. And this is what her calculations come back as, and what she will achieve to get back from the government over a 7-year period, paid at quarterly intervals for those 7 years. And the bottom left-hand box shows you what the EPC tells Ofgem and how to calculate those payments. There's 21,973 kilowatt hours of energy required to heat this particular property, and 2,273 kilowatt hours from the EPC that tells them how much energy will be required to give that property hot water. And we will do this calculation for all properties. It's important to point out as well, this is not person specific, it is property specific. So if you've got 20 properties, you can claim RHI across all 20 and have installs on all 20. And indeed, some registered social landlords have been going at this great guns because they recognise the amount of money they can get back from the government. The Clean Homes Grant comes in from the 1st of April 2022. And this is better for capital assistance if you don't have the capital to invest upfront in those properties. The government have put together £450 million worth of investment for the CHG scheme. When you boil that down, it's £5,000 available for 90,000 homes. £5,000 is the cap. There's no additional information in terms of whether everybody will automatically get £5,000. All I know that is it's not going to be means tested, but it may well be a proportion of a quotation, for example, which is like what they did with the Green Homes Grant Scheme. Same rules apply in respect of the EPC. Within 2 years, done your cavity wall insulation, loft insulation. But the benefit of this scheme is it's a pre-installation application. So what happens is we'll hold your hand through the process. You submit an application for a voucher, and you do that by getting a quote simply and then following an online process. A voucher is issued both to you and a notification to the installer, which I hope would be us. And then we are then responsible for reclaiming that £5,000. Capital and running costs. Typical installation costs for these heat pumps vary dramatically depending on the type of heat pump you go for and the type of property it's going into. Ground source heat pumps are by far and away the most expensive to install, and I think actually the Clean Homes Grant Scheme is going to see a downturn in ground source heat pump installations because the voucher maximum for a ground source heat pump install is 7,000. So you can see there's a large capital investment required to go ground source. On top of ground source, the complications tend to be land. You need typically 1,500 square metres of land to make a trench or slinky system, heat recovery system work. And failing that, it's borehole technology, and a borehole is typically £5,000 just to dig out. That's before you've bought a heat pump, and most ground source heat pump installs will require at least 2 boreholes before you've even considered buying an air source heat pump, ground source heat pump, sorry. Water source, as I mentioned, is a little less on the civils, although there still is civil engineering requirements. But I've almost negated water source because, like I said, you need literally a lake at the side of your property in order to make this viable. And then air source heat pumps typically are lower in cost to install, so therefore a little bit more attractive, certainly for the Clean Heat Grant Scheme. And the cost variance in this particular scheme is, do we need to increase the size of radiators? Do we need to install a different type of water, a hot water system? To the right-hand side, you'll see the annual running costs, and this is again the customer Jane that we're working for today. I ran this for her ahead of obviously going to installation, and at the bottom of the screen you can see what she's paying on her tariff for energy at the moment. She's paying 18 pence per kilowatt hour for electric, and so on and so forth. The LPG and oil pence per kilowatt hour is worked out by a calculation of what we're paying for those fuels in literage. So the LPG literage rate is 56 pence per litre and the oil rate is 58 pence per litre. Obviously, oil and LPG vary dramatically, and they're much less regulated than electric and gas. But all signs are that heating oil for properties is going to be out by the end of this decade, and we don't know what's going to happen with LPG. But you can see across the top there for your tenants, and Jane's particular tenants, they're going to be better off to the tune of about £200 per calendar year by switching to the heat pump technology, and Jane is going to be getting £10,500 back over 7 years for making that investment. Carbon saving, there is certainly a carbon saving to be had. Heat pumps are by far and away the most carbon efficient. You can see there that a standard electric boiler is the worst, and so on and so forth. That's just to show you that if, as a landlord, you've got an eye on the ecology and it's particularly prevalent for you, a heat pump is almost a no-brainer. The compatibility for retrofit, for both schemes, RHI and CHG, they're not available to new build without special exception. So we are typically doing that. All of these are retrofit systems. Now this is Jane's again, and you can see here that these are her existing radiators that she had per room. And what you can see to the right hand side is a column of red crosses, which shows you that all of those radiators are undersized for an air source heat pump. So what we've had to do is increase the size of the radiators to accommodate the air source heat pump. That's because air source heat pumps run at much lower flow rate temperatures than a typical gas boiler. A typical gas boiler will kick out at 68 degrees Celsius, and a heat pump will kick out, it can go up to 60 or 65 degrees Celsius. However, you lose all of the efficiency out of the system. And so we want to run them at 50, no more than 52 degrees. And so therefore, to accommodate those lower flow temperatures, you increase the size of the radiators. If you've already got underfloor heating in the property, then air source heat pumps are fantastic at underfloor heating because they run at the lower temperatures. And what happens with a gas or oil or LPG boiler is you heat the flow rate to 68 degrees, and then before it goes into the underfloor heating system, you inject it with cold water to reduce the temperature. If you're walking on a floor that was 68 degrees, you'd be like walking on hot coals. So the lower the flow rate, sorry, the lower the flow temperature of the air source heat pump, the better it works and the more efficient it works. Of course, to ensure that that is going to work, we may need to apply additional installation materials, hence why the range of a heat pump install can be anywhere between £7,000 or £8,000 right the way through to £17,000 for air source and the other figures as per the previous slide. So just to recap, I'm conscious of time, just to recap and next steps really. An existing property EPC within 2 years is absolutely fundamental, and insulation of properties is absolutely fundamental. Heat pumps offer benefits both to you as the landlord in terms of investment and to get some money back on that investment, and to the tenants, no longer having to wait in for oil deliveries, LPG deliveries, worried about the fluctuation in gas prices, etc., etc. They're a different approach to how a home is heated. You don't run them like you would a traditional boiler. My heat pump at home, it goes on in October. I set the temperature to 21 degrees. And then I turn it off in March, and I've got my home is at a constant temperature right the way throughout the heating seasons. Financial assistance is available through the RHI and the Clean Homes Grant. I would say for both, more prevalent with the RHI is getting there quickly and quickly as we possibly can to get the most benefit out of that RHI scheme. They're the most carbon efficient way to heat your property, and like I've just said, time to act is absolutely key to getting the best deal for you and your properties and your tenants. Hopefully I've covered everything off, Dawn, and I'd like to open it to the floor for any questions or comments. Thanks very much for your time and having me on.
Thank you, Paul. Sorry. That's really, really interesting because I know that I've been working with you for a client of ours that is looking at different heating systems options for them at the moment, and the one that we're looking at in particular has got is solid walls.
Yeah.
So when you say that, I think you mentioned in one of your slides that it must have cavity wall insulation. well, presumably if there's no cavity wall, then we would also need to make sure that it's had sort of external wall insulation or internal wall insulation as well.
Yeah, it's not a prerequisite to get an RHI fund or a CHG fund. It's the cavity that's the big ticket item there. But what I would suggest and advise you to do is insulate those external walls anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the heat pump is that you're injecting energy into the property, and you want the property to retain that energy as best it can. So if the external walls aren't insulated, then obviously you're just going to be wasting energy, and so the running costs will be slightly higher. It does work with solid walls. We've just finished an install in Harlech where the walls were 2 foot thick and solid stone, which have got good insulation properties anyway. And they've had a successful RHI application off the back of that. So yeah, I'd recommend it, but it's not a prerequisite on solid wall.
Great, okay, thank you. Now we have had somebody who has sent in a few questions, so I just wanted to run through those and make sure that they have been answered. So the first one was, is it true that heat pumps do not work at below 5 degrees?
No. So heat pumps do work to very, very low temperatures. The difference is that they lose their kilowatt output, or some of their kilowatt output, at lower temperatures. And this is a very important thing to consider when you're going to get different prices from different installers. All of the manufacturers have to tell you what the kilowatt output of the heat pump is at 0 degrees external temperature. So when it's 0 degrees outside, and a 16 kilowatt air source heat pump will deliver 16 kilowatts. What most people won't tell you is that when you get to -3, -4, -5, actually the kilowatt output of that heat pump drops and can be sometimes as dramatic as down to 12 kilowatts. So we're losing 4 kilowatts of the capacity out of the heat pump. So what you do in that situation is you over-egg or oversize the heat pump to accommodate those drop-offs. Now, the air source heat pumps that we recommend are LG air source heat pumps. They use R32 gas, and they guarantee their kilowatt outputs down to -7. And then there's a drop off thereafter. But in the UK, -7 is not that it's not that prevalent. It doesn't really happen that much. And so what we do, if a customer is concerned about that, is you can build in backup heaters or have bivalent systems. So there's ways and means around it. But the short answer is no, they work very well at -5.
Right, okay, thank you. Is it true that systems fitted with microbore pipework do not work efficiently with a heat pump?
Again, no. Where this comes from is that heat pumps need good flow rate around a central heating system for them to work correctly. And all you do in this scenario, if you've got microbore, is that you put in what we call a buffer tank or a break tank or some sort of low loss header, which guarantees a flow rate around the system. And then off the back of that buffer tank, you have the rest of the heating system. In effect, it's called a mechanical separation device. So you mechanically separate the heat pump from the central heating system, and it works perfectly.
Great, thank you. Is it true that some heat pumps are very noisy and some very quiet? If so, which brands are the quieter ones?
Every heat pump manufacturer will tell you they've got the quietest air source or ground source heat pump on the market. They're all correct because they're all about the same these days. So they run around 65 decibels, which if you were to go to a gas boiler and stand immediately outside where the flue is, and you heard that come on, that's about the noise that they run at. And they do run at 65 decibels up until the point in which they reach temperature. And so once they've reached temperature, the compressor's not working so hard, and it just modulates itself to keep that temperature. If you then start using the heat pump in traditional ways, so you'd turn it on for 2 hours in the morning, let it go cold, and then turn it on for 4, 5, 6 hours in the evening when you're back home, what's happening there is the compressor's working really, really hard to maintain its temperature or get back up to temperature. And so it can become noisy in those situations. But that's not how manufacturers ask you to utilize the equipment. You turn them on, leave them on, and you let them do their thing. The other thing that some installation companies have been doing is installing these on wall brackets, on gable end walls. And what happens there is that the compressors work and the noise is transferred through the through the bracket into the gable end wall, and the gable end wall becomes a gigantic amplifier for the compressor. It's bad practice, shouldn't do it, and so heat pumps should be installed onto solid ground where possible.
Right, okay, that's great. How do we identify the most efficient brand of heat pump to use? I mean, you've said that you recommend LG, so you've obviously done that research yourself.
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways. The main way is to look at the SPF, or seasonal performance factor, of the heat pump. Again, this is given at 0 degrees external temperature, or sometimes it's referred to as the SCOP, which is seasonal coefficient of performance, which is a bit of a mouthful to get out, or SCOP. And the higher the number, the better. So if it's 3, then it's 300% efficient. If it's 4, it's 400% efficient. LG, the LG ones that we'd recommend at a flow temperature of 52 degrees and external temperatures of 0 degrees are now 56% efficient. So it's an SPF of 3.56.
Right, okay, that's great, thank you. I think this one's been answered as well. Will there be any grants in the future for installing a heat pump? Well, you said obviously that's changing in April, so it will be 5,000 maximum.
Yeah.
Okay.
7,000 for a ground source, but like I say, the installation costs will probably put a lot of people off.
Yeah, okay. How can we identify a competent installer and be sure that after the installation, the house will be warm?
Oh, well, you're looking at one for a start off. So the fundamental of the heat pump technology, and the art of it, is in the design of the system. Anybody can chuck in a pipe and a bit of a radiator, you know. So the work is up front. We don't currently charge for that. We made a decision to change our view and not charge for heat loss calculations. And we do a heat loss calculation with the customer and sit down, go through a process. It can take anywhere between 4 and 8 hours for us to do the paperwork, and then sit down with the customer and go through what that means, how the system will need to be utilised, and ensure that they've got enough heat for that property ahead of schedule. The last thing is, it's counterintuitive for us to go out and sell a heat pump, and then for it to go cold, and for a customer to ring us up saying, I'm cold, I've got no heating. And so we've taken the decision just recently not to charge for that consultation process, just so we can get some education and some information out to the wider population, and really sell the benefits of heat pumps.
Right, okay. And also, do you have to change any part of the electrical installation?
No, but you do need to add to it. So you add a 32 amp rotary isolation point to your existing consumer unit, and most properties do have that capacity. The old way of doing things was we had to contact the we had to advise the customer to contact the district network operator, or the DNO, which is either your energy supplier, effectively, ask them for permission to install a heat pump. This is now changing because energy suppliers were stopping us installing heat pumps, and the government now are trying to make us install heat pumps. So that's now changed, or in the process of changing. You don't need to contact the DNO to get that permission. The only impact, like I say, is to add a new electric point to your existing consumer unit, and that is all certified and signed off by a qualified electrician.
Okay, thank you. And the last question: what confidence can we have in access to a reliable breakdown or maintenance service? Well, you've said already that it's very, very little maintenance anyway. So, yeah,
I mean, you need to make sure that the company is MCS accredited. You need to make sure that they've signed up to the Renewable Energy Consumer Code. We took the decision to sign up to Trustmark, just to give customers that extra peace of mind. And indeed, in order to qualify for RHI or CHG, companies have to be accredited by those companies in order to get the funding and to sign them off. So they are the bare minimum. And then just go on testimonials and the usual methods, really. Right,
okay, thank you. And we've got one more question in the chat box from David, who has said, two of our houses, one has solid walls and insulating and plasterboarding over. Would this cause damp or other issues? And the other property is listed, so putting double glazing, etc., is a no, sadly. We currently have gas. Any suggestions? So
hi, David. Hi, David. Thanks for the question. Let's start with the last question first, backwards way around. There are exemptions to properties, and particularly if it's listed. We'd go through a process with Ofgem in that particular case and submit that ahead of any application going forward to make sure that we can make an application for you to have a heat pump in that property and get some money back, be it RHI or CHG. And then with the insulation of external walls, I haven't come across anything where there's been damp or moisture retention issues where properties have been correctly insulated. Indeed, we've done many properties where we've put battens, Celotex, we've used insulated plasterboard, standard plasterboard, all manner rock-wool insulation. Even my own home actually has rock-wool insulation in its cavities, and never been an issue. I think the other point to make on air source heat pumps, if you use them correctly, is that they're on all the time and maintaining a temperature, so there's no chance of it going cold and then hot and cold and hot and creating that moisture. You're literally keeping the heat in the property, so it doesn't really rear its head.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, thank you for that. Don't think we've got any more questions, so thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Paul. It's we'll obviously be sending out a recording of this webinar to all those that are watching today and all those that have registered, so we'll obviously put your contact details in the email that we send out to everyone as well, so people will be able to contact you directly. So thank you very much, and without any further delay, I'll pass you over to Graham, because I'm sure he's got a lot to say, and within the next sort of 20 minutes or so. If we need to go over time, obviously we can do if there's any questions at the end. And then obviously, again, if people have to leave then at 12 o'clock, then they will get the recording. So we'll be able to catch the end if necessary. So thank you, Paul, and I'll hand you over to Graham.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Dawn. I'm just going to share my screen. And can you see that okay, Dawn?
Yeah, we can see that. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you for attending this talk. And I'm going to spend a short while chatting with you about family investment companies. And we commonly come across the perception that they are just for the very wealthy and oligarchs. And actually, nowadays, nothing could be further from the truth. So my name is Graham Loosley. I am a tax accountant, and as the year has clicked round, it's now 36 years experience. And as well as practicing in tax, I'm also running my first marathon this year. And having entered for London and not being certain I get a place, I entered for Manchester also. And lo and behold, I got both places. And that's good because they're both in aid of cancer research. And it's week 2 of training. And it's also the self-assessment season, which for us accountants is our busiest time of year, but hey ho. And I'm a partner in Mercian Accountants. We're based in Shrewsbury, and we look after clients nationally and internationally as well. And our specialism is tax, and we can do our best work for those who face the largest tax bills, where our very significant experience can actually produce very substantial savings. I have to start off with the disclaimer, apologies for this, but it's required by my professional body. So I'm sharing some information with you today, but please do not construe it as advice. And should anybody wish to have some advice, we'd obviously be very happy to assist. So family investment companies are a very useful planning tool. And for those who'd like to get straight to the point, and understand why you might wish to consider such a thing for yourself and your family. Generally speaking, your family, when you go to heaven, will inherit much more wealth if you've set up a family investment company than otherwise. So I've, with some colleagues, my assistant Pete has run some financial models for this presentation, and we assumed a starting position with a typical landlord family with a home, some rental properties and some savings and investments. Of course, every client is different, and in the same way as Paul will do heat loss calculations for his customers, when working with the client, we'll always do proper modelling of the client's own situation to see what the future would look like for them in different planning situations. And to get straight to the point and show what the potential savings are here, if you do nothing, starting from the position we shared just now, and if the couple, and if it's a couple, both go to heaven 10 years from today, the family are going to inherit £1.6 million after they have paid inheritance tax. We also considered the case where you may wish to use your surplus cash and borrowing capacity to purchase some further property. And if you do that in 10 years' time, the family inherit £1.8 million. But if you take the trouble to set up a family investment company, they would actually inherit 2.1 million. And then we all, of course, hope to live a long and healthy life, especially us marathon runners. So let's look at the case 25 years from today. If we do nothing from that starting position, the family receive 2.2 million, but actually they are £500,000 better off, even after 10 years with a family investment company. And after 25 years, the family are going to inherit almost double the amount after tax they otherwise would be. So family investment companies, they're not just for oligarchs, they are for ordinary families. And it's all about inheritance tax, I'm afraid. Inheritance tax bites at 40%. Reliefs and allowances haven't really been increased for many years now, and they have already been frozen for the next 5 years. And when we do see movement in inheritance tax rates, reliefs and allowances, I don't think we can assume they're going to be positive for those who face the tax. But very importantly, when undertaking any planning activity, it's really important to consider the risk profile of the planning. And family investment companies were looked at long and hard by HMRC over the last couple of years, and last year were given a clean bill of health. And this was quite widely reported. So there simply isn't anything we can do in tax planning that has had such a recent review and in such depth by HMRC. And this has the lowest risk profile of all tax planning currently. And we landlords know all too well about Section 24, George Osborne's parting gift, bless him. If you're a landlord and you have personal mortgages, no matter the rate of tax that you pay, whether you pay 40% tax or even 45% tax, you cannot receive greater than 20% relief against your mortgage interest. On the other hand, consider the position with a family investment company. If I loan money to my family investment company, I receive 100% tax relief at whatever rate of tax I face. So quick recap on inheritance tax. Fortunately, it's a tax that we don't pay ourselves. It's the tax that our families pay on the inheritance they receive from us, and it's paid on the estate. Broadly speaking, if you're an average family, there is such a thing nowadays, there's about £1 million of relief available. Tradespeople and farmers receive quite generous exemptions, but not us landlords, unfortunately. We don't tend to get any relief whatsoever, and that includes furnished holiday let activities, as well as single lets and HMOs. So what will the family end up paying? Well, let's take an example where we have wealth today of 925,000, And let's assume the last death of the couple is going to be in 25 years' time. And we assume that the long-term rates of growth in UK property, which have trended at 3% for the last 30 years, continue forwards. If we do nothing, the family pay £375,000 of inheritance tax when the time comes. And the really unkind part here is they have to pay that inheritance tax before they can receive the inheritance. And we often see clients having to go to bridging finance, and we all know how expensive that can be before they can actually deal with the estate and access the inheritance. And the really interesting thing is the better advised the estate has been, the lower the rate of tax. Typical estates facing inheritance tax, generally between £1 and £8 million, tend to pay around 20% of the estate to HMRC in inheritance tax. Once we get to £10 million estates around there, they're paying half. They tend to pay 10%. And my favourite example of what can happen for the very wealthy is a good old Duke of Westminster, whose family and his family trusts own much of central London. They paid 0% inheritance tax on his estate, which was valued at in excess of 8 billion back in 2016. So the wealthier you are, the better advice you receive, the less tax your family will have to pay. And family investment companies are a very popular planning tool of the wealthy, and increasingly these days, ordinary families. So what is a family investment company? Well, it's a company. What sets it apart from an ordinary company is it has some bespoke rules and share classes, which I'll come to. The shareholders tend to be all members of the same family. And the really important point is the parents, where the wealth is coming from, retain complete control over the assets. And the reason that clients set these up effectively is to accumulate wealth tax efficiently and reduce the inheritance tax bill that the later generations face when the time comes. There's a strong degree of protection built into family investment companies as well. I'm often advising clients who are concerned about risks to their wealth. Many clients have a son or daughter-in-law or prospective son or daughter-in-law who they may view as a risk, who knows. And sadly nowadays, 42% of marriages end in divorce, and divorce is getting easier. And quite apart from that, there are lots of other risks to wealth. We've even advised clients where a member of the family has joined the cult and has wished to gift all of their wealth to that cult. So family investment companies provide a great degree of protection for the family's wealth for future generations. So let's look at the starting position. This is where I shall be, of course, not in the front row in a few months' time. I shall be quite a long way towards the back, I expect. But we start with an ordinary company. It's difficult enough to open bank accounts these days because the banks in the UK seem to have withdrawn from providing banking services. But we start with an ordinary company and we get a bank account open. And then we apply some magic to the company. And the difference between a family investment company and an ordinary company is as great as bespoke tailoring and off the peg. And the sorts of areas that the professionals need to apply changes to would be the articles of association, which are the rule book of the company. We need to create some bespoke classes of shares and various legal documents. There's quite a bit to do to turn an ordinary company into a family investment company. So companies are owned by their shareholders, and fundamentally shares can confer three rights on the holders of those shares. Shares can have votes, and votes bring power. Shares can also have rights to income and the receipt of dividends, and shares can also have rights to capital in the event the company is sold or wound up. The holders of those shares can enjoy capital. But not all shares have to have the same rights. In an ordinary company, you tend to have one class of shares which had all three rights shown here. But in a family investment company, we create some different classes. we'll typically create some control shares for the parents. Now, the parent shares have all the power, they have the votes, but they have no rights to dividends and no rights to capital. We'll then create shares for the children, which would effectively be the opposite of the parent shares. The children's shares have no power, no votes, but they can receive dividends and they can receive capital. And sometimes we set up a Trinity share scheme where we create a further class of shares for grandchildren, for example, which would be held in discretionary trust. And we can make it as simple or as complex as the client's needs present. So we have multiple classes of shares, and that's one of the key things that turns an ordinary company into a family investment company. So we have to consider, why would we do this, and how are companies and shares valued? Now, you would think, wouldn't you, that if a share has no right to income and no right to capital, it would be worth less. However, the received position, settled in tax cases, is that the control shares hold about 25% of the value, and the capital income shares that are held by the family are actually devalued to about 75% of the company's value. So we can't get rid of all the wealth, but we can make a substantial difference while keeping all the control. So who should have the control? Well, I say, being a parent myself with adult children, the parent should have control. And an optional extra that some clients have with a family investment company is they actually use a trust to hold the control shares. Because the interesting thing is, if I have my control shares held in a trust and the trust sits outside my inheritance tax estate, I can also save my family paying inheritance tax on my 25% as well. But you don't need to have that, and we haven't used that in the examples built into this presentation. What about income? It is possible to take income from a family investment company, but that would then undermine some of the inheritance tax savings. Both the parents and the family can have income, the family can have dividends, and the parents can have salaries and expenses. But the more income we take out of the structure, the less inheritance tax we can save. So we shouldn't be looking at setting up a family investment company if the goal is to continue extracting maximum income on this wealth. But many clients setting up such a structure already have a personal portfolio of properties that are providing sufficient income, and the family investment company, the goal for that is to get some of the wealth away from inheritance tax. So we have to look at mortgages, because to set up a family investment company we need cash, and most landlords I know tend to be asset rich and cash poor, because as soon as they have sufficient cash for a deposit they tend to buy another property. Although the last couple of years the market's been quite challenging. We can't simply take personal properties we already own and transfer them to the family investment company, because we could likely trigger capital gains tax up to 28%. Even in the Telford market, properties do go up in value. And there's also stamp duty land tax to consider, which is a sliding scale up to 12% plus the 3% for investment properties. And if you move more than one property at the same time, you wouldn't get the sliding scale applied to each property individually. You'd actually value the whole transaction and would effectively pay more stamp duty. So it's much more efficient to raise mortgages on the personal properties and then lend cash across to the family investment company. So it's mortgages, not disposals. And those personal mortgages really want to be interest only, because contrary to popular opinion, having debt can be good if the debt's serving a good purpose, but you have to be aware that you are increasing your gearing and risk. But for me, taking debt on property, purchasing property, although I can't give investment advice, last 30 years says that properties go up. Of course, the past doesn't predict the future, but as Mark Twain said, buy land because they've stopped making it, and we do live on quite a small, quite a crowded island. So what happens when we first set up the family investment company? Well, we have to make a repayment loan from the parents to the company. It must be on commercial terms and interest bearing, and it could be over a 20 or 30-year period. And on day one, the parents have less cash because they've given it to the family investment company, but they now have a debtor. The company owes them. So we've actually made no change whatsoever to the net worth of the parents. And in the family investment company, it's now got money in the bank because it's received a loan, but it's also now got a creditor. It owes a loan to the parents, so its net worth on day one is 0. The family investment company now should consider gearing up and investing. You can invest in property, you can invest in the stock market, or a combination of both. But typically we see clients buying rentals, and in the family investment company, the value of investments goes up. But if they take mortgages to leverage the money and buy more property, then of course the creditors in the company increase further. So the company is still holding little value. It's optional to gear up the company in this way. And of course you have to look at lender wishes. And as we all know, limited company mortgages can be more difficult than personal mortgages, buy-to-let property. So what happens each month once the company is set up and running? Well, HMRC take a very dim view of paper exercises. There must be real transactions, money must change hands. So the company receives rental income from the tenants. It must pay its expenses, including any mortgages it's taken out, which would tend to be interest only, and it makes repayments of the loan from the parents, both the capital and the interest. The parents, of course, pay their mortgages they've taken out, and they must then spend or give away any capital they receive back. If the parents receive repayments of the loan and put it into a savings account, we aren't achieving the goal. The goal is to make the parents poorer so that less inheritance tax is paid. If the parents don't want to spend or give away the capital repayments, they could, of course, give them to a trust, and if the trust is structured correctly, it can be outside the inheritance tax estate and further savings can be achieved. So there are three scenarios we're looking at here. The first one is the ostrich scenario of doing nothing. We also considered what would happen if we were to gear up and increase our personal property portfolio without a family investment company, and then we looked at a family investment company. It's important I state my assumptions. Now, of course, everything changes all the time. So when we're modeling for clients and doing annual reviews, if any of these assumptions change from year to year, of course, we adjust the models and adjust the advice. But we've been quite cautious in terms of the rates and percentages that we've assumed. So what do they inherit? If we do nothing, in 25 years' time, from the starting position I stated, the family received £2.2 million. If we set up a family investment company, they receive nearly double. This can make a dramatic difference to the financial security and safety of your family in the future. Now, there are some special cases. Sadly, we act for clients sometimes where they have limited life expectancy, and we also sometimes sadly have to do deathbed planning, and it's possible to save inheritance tax when there is little as 2 years life expectancy available. But here's an example for a 7-year life expectancy. We could actually put cash into a discretionary trust before routing it into the family investment company, and after 7 years we could save this family £350,000 of tax when the time comes. So with inheritance tax planning, the sooner we act, the greater the savings are possible. It's possible to save inheritance tax with as little as 2 years survival. And of course, in a 7-year scenario, as given here, we can save over £250,000. And although this isn't usually a popular choice with landlords, it's possible for family investment companies to invest in the stock market. And for those that wish to do so, comparing a family investment company to a personal investor, they get tax relief that personal investors don't get, and they also get tax relief on borrowings for investments in the stock market, which is one of the main things that personal landlords use to leverage their own cash and capital to build a portfolio. In a family investment company, you can do the same thing with the stock market. And when dividend income is received from one company to another, there is no tax liability. Tax is only triggered on dividend income when the money is extracted outside of the family investment company and taken personally. So very powerful planning, obviously requires great expertise, and there are fees applicable. When we produce a tax planning report for a client, they typically start from around £1,950, including a full fact find and modelling to project forward what different planning ideas would do over the next 10, 20, 30 years. For those who wish to set up a family investment company, having had a report, typically those fees start from £2,950. The more complicated the family investment company is, and the greater the wealth, of course, the fees tend to increase. And then the annual servicing and maintenance costs on a family investment company start from around £1,450. And of course, the more complex the company and the greater the asset values protected, those fees would tend to increase as well. The good news is there's tax relief on all of those fees, but it's partial tax relief, and that again depends on the client's own circumstances. Now, moving away from family investment companies and just being an accountant chatting to some landlords generally, many of my own clients are aware the self-assessment deadline's been extended, but please notice that the interest trigger date was not extended. So even if you're not in a position to file your self-assessment on time, you will not pay a late filing penalty if you file before the 28th of February, but please pay the expected tax by the 31st of January, or interest will start to run. And for those who are struggling to get this done, I'm pleased to say that we at Mercian currently have capacity to help anybody who needs some assistance. One other topic, generally as accountants to landlords, HMRC have an obsession with all things digital. They're running a campaign called Making Tax Digital, which we accountants like to joke is making tax difficult. That's the sort of thing that makes accountants laugh. But broadly, if you are a business owner or a landlord with personal business or property income over £10,000, then you're going to have to do this. But they have just kicked it down the road, and it won't now be affecting you until April 2024. But I would say the right time to get set up for this is at least a year in advance. I don't want to see people struggling, trying to get things organised at the last minute. So we've really got to be thinking about this time next year would be an appropriate time to start getting set up. So what do we offer at Mercian? It's friendly advice. We help clients achieve large tax savings, and we charge competitive fees. If anybody would like to contact me about points covered here, of course, Dawn will pass questions across and refer people across, but my email and website and office telephone number are on the screen for those who would like to have them. And a quick plug for my marathon fundraising campaign. If anybody feels motivated to help an elderly accountant raise some money for cancer research by running his first ever marathon, they could go to bit.ly/Graham-marathon and help with my Manchester effort. And assuming that I'm still alive after Manchester, come October, we have the London Marathon as well, which is bit.ly/Graham-London. Now, I'm ready to ask for questions, but I would remind you all, please, do not share confidential personal circumstances in a public forum, but I'd be happy to help with any questions. So over to Dawn. Do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, Graham. That was really interesting. I can't see now that we've had any questions throughout that, but I think there's a lot to digest there actually, because I didn't know anything about family investment companies previously, and I think it would be helpful actually if you, both you and Paul, could send me your slides so that we can pass those on to all those as well that are that have watched this webinar and see the recording as well. That would be really useful. to be able to have that to sort of refer back to. But the way I've sort of interpreted what you've said with regards to family investment companies, purely as a person that knew nothing about them, is that if there is a landlord or an investor that is looking at investing in properties, not necessarily for the income straight away, but in order to invest money for the long term, and is looking for sort of, you know, long-term family planning, then it would be recommended that they look into maybe setting up a family investment company, because that will be the best tax savings for them. Is that right?
Every case is different, but broadly speaking, people who have a decent level of income are paying 40–45% income tax. If they make rental profits, they then have 60 or 55% available to reinvest in their property business. Limited companies currently pay 19% corporation tax. Corporation tax is going up next year. There's a rate of 25% for larger companies and a tapered rate for companies making profits over £50,000. But generally, companies are more tax efficient than personal ownership. But it's not all good news, because mortgages are more difficult to get. The arrangement fees are higher and interest rates are higher, but clients tend to find that the tax savings outweigh the mortgage difficulties. So if you don't want the income straight away, you'll do better in a company, and your family will do a lot better in a company if your estate is going to be affected by inheritance tax.
Yes, right. Thank you very much for that. I think I've had one question that's popped up now, actually. From David again, remaking tax digital. Do you have any websites or other guidance you'd advise that we can look into now to familiarise ourselves with the new system?
Yes, there are. The starting point for all this is HMRC's own website. They do publish news there about making tax digital. But what it's broadly going to mean is, rather than filing an annual tax return as we do now, we're going to have to use software, accounting or bookkeeping software, to record all the transactions. We're then going to have to create the tax return electronically from that accounting bookkeeping system. And most of us who've been in this profession a few years now are of the opinion, but it's leading up to quarterly tax returns. That's what they're leading up to. We'll go away from annual tax returns and we'll go to quarterly tax returns. And you have to ask yourself the question, why would HMRC want us to file quarterly tax returns? Well, possibly they want us to pay tax quarterly as well. And the other major change that's coming is they're possibly going to change for tax year, although there's a working party looking at that currently. And anybody who's got a set of accounts for a partnership where they don't have an accounting year that matches the tax year, that's going to get changed as well. So I think we're moving much more to a real-time tax system. I think we're heading towards quarterly tax payment. But HMRC do publish some quite good information on this, as of course do all the professional bodies.
Thank you very much. No more questions have popped up. So I know we've run over time here, and thank you both very much for speaking today. Hopefully all those that have watched and all those that are watching the recording have found that really useful. And again, I will pass on contact details for both Paul and Graham. I know that when Graham last did our webinar back in September, that a number of clients have contacted you directly for advice and have come back to me and said that, you know, how helpful you've been. So that's really good. And also, if there's anyone that would like to suggest any speakers going forward for these webinars, and also any particular topics they would like to sort of discuss in more detail, then please email me, and we'll do our best to plan them again to suit the climate and to suit people's needs. The next one, we're end of January, so it'll probably be sort of mid to end of March. Yeah, thank you very much again for watching. I'll stop recording now.